Hello everybody, Cam Sweet here from the Garage Connection, coming to you today with a conversation about hydraulic cylinders, specifically the ones in your mini excavator. And what we're going to do, we're going to take a look at, number one, the parts of the hydraulic cylinders. And then I'm going to kind of talk about the differences between some of these machines where you have the hydraulic cylinder on the outside of the main boom, and other ones that are upgraded or whatever you want to call it, that has the cylinder on the other side of the boom. We're going to talk about the differences between those two applications and which one might be right for you. So stay tuned. So because I enjoy taking things apart, and I happen to have some spare hydraulic cylinders around, this is actually the cylinder from the top of the boom that extends the little arm at the very end. So we have some very basic components here that we're going to talk about. This is the cylinder body right here, okay? And as you can see, we've got two threaded hydraulic connections. One of them is obviously putting fluid into the lower part, and the other one comes up and puts fluid into the top part. Okay? We have a pin hole down here, grease fitting, etc., etc. Now on the inside of this, there's going to be some threads. That is very important because these threads engage with that nut on the top to keep the whole cylinder together so you don't shoot the rod and the piston out the other end of it. Now the actual rod, there's some more parts that we have to talk about here, okay? We've got a bunch of little O-rings and gland seals. Okay, we've got the nut that goes at the top, and then we have the rod body itself. Now, there's a couple of important things when you get into this side of hydraulics, all right? You want to make sure that you don't have any nicks in the rod itself. This is a very, very crucial part. And if you have any rust or chipping or whatever, eventually what you're going to do is you're going to tear up the seals that are inside of this nut, and then you're going to start getting hydraulic leaks. Also, you know, if you have any contamination in your system or whatnot, and you start to tear up these glands or these O-rings at all, then what you're going to have is you're going to have some creep inside your hydraulic system where this nut will actually, this end here will actually start to work its way through the cylinder and let the fluid bypass internally. All right. Other than that, the hydraulic cylinders are pretty simple. You're just pushing on one side or the other to go ahead and actuate your cylinder and do some movement. Now, this is very important when we talk about pushing or pulling or whatever you want to call it, extending, retracting, because we have different forces at play here, and we're going to talk about the math and the science behind those two things. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is in hydraulics is how we apply force, okay? The pump is what's creating the flow, but flow doesn't mean anything without a restriction. If you have flow with no restriction, you have no pressure. So what sets the restriction in our hydraulic system is either your load or your hydraulic relief valve that's inside your valve body. Whatever one of those requires more effort or to do something, then that will be your system pressure. So the other thing about hydraulics is application of force is universal. So if you apply a certain amount of force on one end, at the other end that will translate to a given amount of force. In this situation we have, if I apply 10 pounds of force to a 1 square inch area, at the other side of that hydraulic system I would be able to lift 100 pounds of force over a 10 square inch area. All right, so we see this all the time where you can have a little jack, bottle jack, right? You pump the hell out of it. You can lift 20 tons with a little tiny bottle jack because you're applying a given amount of force to a very small area at the trade-off of 1.5 million pumps, and you're able to lift incredibly heavy things. So when we talk about how to actually get a force through our hydraulic cylinders, things aren't really fair because you have a certain amount of pressure acting on a certain area. Now in our hydraulic cylinder, we got two ends, okay? Over here, this is called the cap end, and over here is the rod end. You think of it as either side of that central cap in the middle. Our system pressure is 2,500 psi. That's what your relief valves are generally set at, 22, 27, somewhere around there. So we can calculate force if we know two things, the pressure and the area, okay? The pressure's easy because you get a gauge, 2,500 psi, there you go. Your area is a little trickier. Right? There's a couple different ways to get area. You can use the pi r squared method. You can use the diameter squared times 0.7854 method. You can go on Google and just plug it into a calculator because nobody remembers geometry. But eventually what you come up with is a cap that has a 1.925 inch diameter, which is what I measured those pieces on the workbench at. Comes up to 2.91 square inches of area. Okay? So we take our calculation here, pressure times area. That gives us an expanding force, all right, force going this way, of 7,275 pounds, max. It could be less, obviously, if you're able to lift whatever you want to lift. It's not going to get that high. When we talk about the other side, though, this is where we got to add in something, okay? Because 2,500 psi cannot act on the other end because the rod's in the way. So we're reducing the amount of surface area we have to push on, okay? So to do that calculation, what you have to figure out is the area of the rod and subtract that from the overall area of the piston itself. So I've done this math for us. Here the rod's 1.180 inches in diameter. You run it through the calculator, we get 1.09 square inches, all right? You do the math, and the rod end, we come up with 1.82 inches squared of area, and that is basically this area all the way around the rod, okay? Because we have less area, we have less force, and that number ends up being 4550, okay? So we say, well, how does this play into my mini excavator, right? If you have a piston and a cylinder that's on the outside where it's inevitably going to get hit with everything, right? When you go to lift, you're acting on the large end. Great, you've got a lot of lifting force, but nobody's really using these things for sheer lifting force, right? We want to dig. If that's the case, you have a smaller surface area to actually force the bucket down. Thankfully, 4,500 pounds of retracting force is more than enough to basically tip the machine over, or certainly lift it off the ground. Now, for those of you that get maybe some of the upgraded units where they take this and they throw it on the other side, now our forces that are acting, we have a fantastic amount of force going down, and we suffer a little bit lifting up. Okay? Now, these things, you may never actually run into these problems or these limits because whatever you're doing may require less force. But it's good to know how it kind of translates into what we're doing here. The other thing that's worth mentioning, because the pump is a certain displacement with every rotation, which means it's a certain flow, you know that to fill the area over here, it's going to take more time than to fill this area because there's less of it because the rod's in the way. This is why these hydraulic cylinders, they're not smooth one way and then the other. They don't have they go slow on the way out and they haul ass on the way back in. So I just wanted to kind of break this down, that way you can see what you get when you switch these two things. You know, if you're thinking about ordering a custom machine and you say, hey, do me a favor, throw the cylinder on the outside, this is what you get. All right? Thank you for watching this quick video. Cam Sweet from the Garage Connection, and please stay on those projects.